Black girl was pushed into the pool by Mafia boss. Then she exposed his crimes. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Maya Johnson was just a regular girl, trying to keep her head down, living her life like anyone else. But that all changed when she crossed paths with Vincent Romano, a powerful mafia boss who didn't take kindly to being ignored. Maya had just been enjoying a quiet afternoon at the local community pool, the sun glistening on the water, when it happened. Vincent, surrounded by his usual entourage, was busy showing off his power and influence. He had made a reputation for himself as someone who could do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, with no consequences. Maya, unaware of the storm brewing around her, was simply minding her own business when a casual bump from one of Vincent's men sent her books flying into the pool. It wasn't an accident. The group laughed, clearly enjoying the discomfort they caused her. But Maya wasn't one to let things slide. She stared them down, her eyes defiant, knowing full well that she wasn't about to let this slide. That's when it happened. Vincent, noticing the defiance in her eyes, decided to show her just how powerless she truly was. With a sneer, he took a few steps toward her, his voice dripping with arrogance as he ordered one of his men to push Maya into the pool. The crowd fell silent, watching as she stumbled and splashed into the water. For a brief moment, Maya felt a rush of humiliation, but something deeper stirred inside her. As she surfaced, gasping for air, something inside her clicked. She was done being afraid. She wasn't going to let this man get away with it. Little did Vincent know, Maya wasn't just some helpless girl. She had been paying attention, observing everything around her. In the weeks that followed, she gathered information, making connections that no one had even noticed. It wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about everything Vincent had done, the crimes he had hidden behind his wealth and power. She knew the truth, and she wasn't afraid to expose it. The next day, at a high-profile event, Maya made her move. With all eyes on her, she stood up, calm and collected, and began to speak. She revealed everything. Every illegal deal, every dirty secret Vincent had tried so hard to cover up. The room went silent. Vincent's face turned pale as the truth unfolded before him, the very thing he had feared most. For the first time, he realized he wasn't untouchable. The people who had once feared him now saw him for what he truly was, a coward hiding behind a facade of power. Maya walked out of the room, her head held high, leaving behind a man who had underestimated her at every turn. Maya sat in her small apartment, her mind still racing from the events of the previous day. She had never imagined herself in such a position, revealing the deepest secrets of a man who had once been untouchable. But now, as the reality of what she had done began to settle in, a sense of satisfaction washed over her. She had exposed Vincent Romano for what he truly was, a criminal hiding behind his wealth and influence. Maya had always known that people like him thrived on fear, but what she hadn't realized until now was how easily they could be brought down by the truth. Her heart pounded as she replayed the moment in her head, the look on Vincent's face when she had revealed his crimes. It was a moment of pure power, a feeling she had never experienced before. As she looked out the window, watching the sun set over the city, Maya couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would Vincent try to retaliate? Would his allies come after her? The questions swirled in her mind, but she quickly pushed them aside. She had made it this far by trusting herself, and she wasn't about to stop now. The next few days passed in a blur. Maya tried to return to her normal life, but the weight of what she had done hung over her. She received a few messages from friends congratulating her on her courage, but she knew the real challenge was yet to come. It wasn't enough to expose Vincent's crimes. She had to make sure the truth reached the right people. That's when she received a call. It was from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to have information that would help her bring Vincent down once and for all. Maya listened carefully as the person spoke, their voice low and urgent. "I know where the money is hidden," they said. "All the illegal funds he's been laundering. I can help you find it." Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was the break she had been waiting for. But there was one catch. The source wouldn't reveal their identity until they had her trust. "Meet me at the docks tomorrow," the voice continued. "I'll be there. But you need to be careful. Vincent's people are everywhere." The call ended abruptly, leaving Maya with more questions than answers. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't back down now. She spent the night preparing, gathering everything she would need for the meeting. The next morning, she set out for the docks, her mind focused on the task at hand. As she arrived, she could feel the tension in the air. The docks were quiet, the only sound the distant hum of machinery. Maya scanned the area, looking for any sign of the person who had called her. She didn't have to wait long. A figure stepped out from behind a shipping container, their face hidden in the shadows. "You came," the voice said. Maya took a cautious step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I had to," she replied. "What do you have for me?" The figure reached into their coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "Everything you need is on here," they said. "The proof you need to take Vincent down. But you have to act fast. His people are already onto you." Maya nodded, taking the flash drive from the figure's hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, before turning to leave. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She quickened her pace, her senses on high alert. When she finally reached her car, she breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew this was just the beginning. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop as soon as she got home, her fingers trembling slightly as the file opened. The documents on the drive detailed everything Vincent had done: money laundering, illegal business deals, bribery, you name it. It was all there, and it was all damning. But there was more. Hidden within the files were records of Vincent's connections to some of the most powerful figures in the city. Names of politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officers who had been on his payroll for years. Maya's eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. This wasn't just about Vincent anymore. It was about bringing down an entire network of corruption. Maya knew that exposing this kind of information could change everything, but it also meant putting herself in even greater danger. As she sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, she realized something. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help. The following days were a whirlwind. Maya reached out to a trusted journalist who had covered corruption in the past, hoping that they would be willing to help her expose what she had uncovered. When they agreed, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. Together, they would bring Vincent and his network to justice. As the story broke, the city was in shock. The powerful Mafia boss, the man who had once ruled with an iron fist, was now exposed for all to see. The police launched an investigation, and within weeks, Vincent was arrested, his empire crumbling beneath him. Maya's role in the investigation remained anonymous, but she knew that the truth had been revealed, and that was all that mattered. Looking back, Maya realized that the moment she had stood up to Vincent at the pool had been the turning point in her life. She had gone from being a victim of discrimination and fear to becoming the one who exposed the lies and corruption that had kept the powerful in control. And in that moment, Maya knew she had found her true power. Maya woke up to a bright morning, the rays of the sun gently filtering through the blinds of her apartment. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding her breath until now. The last few days had been a whirlwind, gathering evidence, working with the journalist, and waiting for the world to react. But today, everything felt different. The truth was out there now. The city was buzzing with the scandal, and for the first time in her life, Maya felt like she had control. It wasn't about power or revenge. It was about justice. She had exposed the crimes of one of the most dangerous men in the city. But it was more than just the mafia. It was about taking down the corrupt system that allowed people like Vincent to thrive for so long. She had come so far, but she couldn't afford to relax just yet. As Maya sat at her small kitchen table, sipping her coffee, she couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. She had gone from being a girl who tried to stay invisible to someone who now had a voice that the entire city was forced to listen to. Her mind raced as she thought about her next steps. She knew that Vincent was dangerous, and now that he had been arrested, his associates would be looking for ways to protect him, to ensure that nothing happened to their empire. Maya couldn't allow that to happen. She had to make sure the story didn't get buried. As she packed her bag to head out for the day, Maya felt a strange mixture of nerves and excitement. Today was going to be different. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had become a player in a game much bigger than herself. As she stepped out of her apartment and into the bustling city streets, Maya noticed something she hadn't expected. People were talking about her. Whispers followed her wherever she went. She overheard people in coffee shops and on street corners discussing the story, some praising her bravery, others questioning her motives. But there was one thing she knew for sure. Vincent was no longer the one in control. She was. Maya had worked hard to get to this point. She had sacrificed a lot to make sure the truth came to light. But now that the dust had started to settle, she couldn't ignore the fact that she was facing something bigger than she had ever imagined. The power players in this city weren't going to let Vincent's downfall go unnoticed. They were watching her, waiting for her to slip up. As she walked through the city, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a message from the journalist she had been working with. They're moving fast. The investigation is gaining traction. Vincent's allies are trying to spin the story in their favor. We need to act quickly. Maya read the message and felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had known this would happen, but seeing it in writing made it all the more real. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. That evening, Maya met with the journalist again. They sat in a small, dimly lit cafe, the only place they could talk without being overheard. They're already trying to cover it up, the journalist said, their voice low and urgent. But we have the truth on our side. We need to get it out there before they start silencing people. Maya nodded. She had known that this would be a fight, but she hadn't realized just how dangerous it would become. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. We can't let them get away with this. We need to make sure the whole city knows what Vincent has done and what's at stake. As they left the cafe and stepped into the night, Maya felt a sense of determination rise within her. She was no longer afraid. She had already faced the worst of it. What was left now was to finish what she had started. Maya spent the next few days working tirelessly with the journalist, gathering more evidence and making sure every detail was in place. They were preparing to release the full story, every single secret that Vincent had tried to hide, every deal he had made, every corrupt politician and businessman who had been on his payroll. Maya had the power now, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. The night before the story was set to break, Maya stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. She was no longer the girl who had been pushed into the pool by Vincent. She was stronger than that. She had learned how to stand up for herself, how to fight for what was right. As the clock ticked down to the moment of truth, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had done what so many others had been too afraid to do. And now, as the city waited to see what would happen next, Maya knew that she had already won. The day finally arrived. The full story, every detail Maya had painstakingly gathered, was about to be released. As the city braced itself for the fallout, Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. She had been through so much to get here, and now it was time to see if the truth would truly set her free. For days, the media had been buzzing with rumors, with snippets of information slipping through the cracks. The whispers of corruption, the Mafia ties, the politicians involved, they were all swirling around. But now, Maya was ready to silence all the rumors, to bring the truth to light. She sat in her small apartment, her laptop open in front of her, the cursor blinking on the screen. She took a deep breath and clicked send. Within seconds, the email was out, the story was out, and there was no going back. The journalists were already starting to pick it up. Social media exploded. People were talking. Maya could feel the surge of adrenaline as the story spread like wildfire, but there was no turning back now. She was in the eye of the storm. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. As the day wore on, Maya kept checking her phone, her heart racing with each new notification. The city was in shock. The authorities were scrambling to respond, but the truth was out. Vincent Romano's empire was crumbling. The names of his allies were being revealed, one by one. The connections to powerful politicians, the illegal dealings, the money laundering, it was all there. Vincent's once impenetrable fortress was falling apart, and there was no way to stop it now. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. She had done it. She had exposed the truth, and now everyone would see Vincent for who he truly was. But even as the victory settled in, a nagging thought lingered in the back of her mind. What would happen to her now? Vincent had powerful connections, and his allies wouldn't go down without a fight. Maya knew that she had just made herself a target. The next morning, As she sipped her coffee and watched the news reports unfold, she received an unexpected call. It was from the journalist she had worked with. "Maya," the journalist said, their voice tense, "we've got a problem. Vincent's people are starting to push back. They're trying to discredit the story, but we can't. Let them." Maya's stomach churned. She had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed made her feel the gravity of the situation. She had exposed Vincent's empire, but now she was in the crosshairs. She couldn't back down now. She had come too far, and the stakes were too high. "What's the plan?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "We're going to need more evidence," the journalist replied. "Something that links Vincent directly to the money laundering operations, something that even his people can't deny." Maya nodded. She had a hunch that there was more to uncover. She had seen the files, but she hadn't had time to go through them all. She knew there were still pieces missing, and now it was up to her to find them. The following days were a blur of investigation, long hours spent poring over the documents, chasing down leads, and meeting with the journalist to strategize. Every time Maya thought she had uncovered everything, another piece of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. She realized that Vincent's network was even larger than she had imagined, and the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. But Maya was relentless. She wasn't afraid. As the days passed, the tension mounted. Vincent's associates began to retaliate, trying to silence anyone who might speak out. But Maya was no longer the scared girl she had once been. She was determined to finish what she had started. She knew that she was risking everything, but it was a risk she was willing to take. She had already seen the power of the truth. Now, it was time to use it to bring down the entire system of corruption. On the final day of her investigation, Maya found what she was looking for, a set of emails, carefully hidden, that contained the smoking gun she needed. It was a direct link between Vincent and the largest money laundering operation in the city, and it was all laid out in black and white. With the evidence in hand, Maya knew that this was her moment. She called the journalist and arranged for the final story to be released. As the article went live, Maya watched the city hold its breath. The response was immediate. Authorities began making arrests. People who had been untouchable for years were suddenly being exposed. Vincent's reign was over. But as Maya sat back and watched the world unfold around her, she felt a sense of closure. She had done what she set out to do. The truth had won. And with it, Maya had found something she never thought she'd have, control over her own life. Maya sat quietly at her desk, staring at the screen of her laptop. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, investigation, and media frenzy. The city had shifted under the weight of the truth she had uncovered, and now, as Vincent Romano's empire began to crumble, Maya found herself at the center of it all. The arrests, the headlines, the power shifts, it was all happening, just as she had hoped. But there was something else. Maya had been watching the news closely, waiting for the next move, and she realized something she hadn't anticipated. Despite all the victories, there were still lingering doubts. The truth was out there, but was it enough? Vincent might be behind bars, but his network was vast. The corruption ran deep. Maya knew she had only scratched the surface. She had exposed the tip of the iceberg, but beneath it, there were layers of deceit, bribery, and criminal activity that still needed to be uprooted. The weight of this realization hit her hard. She couldn't stop now. As she looked out the window of her apartment, the city stretched out before her, bustling and alive. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. She had gone from a quiet girl who stayed in the background to a force that was now shaping the future of the city. Yet, the responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. Maya had uncovered truths that many would prefer to remain buried, but there was more to do. She had started something, and she couldn't stop until it was finished. The sound of her phone vibrating on the table snapped Maya out of her thoughts. She picked it up, seeing a message from the journalist she had been working with. "We have a lead," the message read. "There's more to the story. Meet me tonight." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this. There was always more, always something deeper to uncover. She quickly typed back, "Where?" The journalist replied with a simple address. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed her jacket and left her apartment, heading into the night. The address led her to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. It was quiet, dark, and forgotten by time. As she approached, the journalist's figure emerged from the shadows. "You came," they said, their voice a mix of urgency and relief. "What's this about?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found something," the journalist replied. "Something big. You were right. Vincent's network is just the beginning. There's another player in the game, someone bigger." Maya frowned. "Who?" "I don't know yet," the journalist said. "But I've been tracking this for a while. There are more names, more connections. And the deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had known that this fight wasn't over, but she hadn't expected it to lead here. "So what's our next move?" she asked. "We need to dig further. We have to get to the source. But we can't do it alone. This is bigger than both of us." Maya nodded. She had always known that the battle wasn't just about one man, one corrupt figure. It was about an entire system that had to be brought down. The stakes were higher now. It wasn't just about exposing Vincent. It was about taking down the people who had been pulling the strings for far too long. Over the next few days, Maya and the journalist worked tirelessly. They tracked leads, dug through files, and pieced together fragments of information. It was a race against time. Every step they took seemed to open up more doors, more questions. And every answer they uncovered led to something darker, more twisted. The connections between Vincent's operations and the larger criminal network were clearer now, but there were still gaps in the story. Maya knew they had to find the final piece, the one that would tie everything together. One night, after hours of sifting through documents, Maya found it. A name she hadn't expected. This was the person who had been pulling the strings from the shadows all along. Maya's hands shook as she read through the file. It was a name that was linked to several high-profile figures, including politicians and business magnates. This was the person who had been behind the scenes, orchestrating everything. It all made sense now. Maya knew what she had to do. This was the final step, the last piece of the puzzle. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. Maya called the journalist, her voice steady but urgent. "We have the name," she said. "We're going to bring them down." As the two of them set their plan into motion, Maya realized that this was the moment that would define everything. The story wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about changing the entire system. And she was going to make sure that the truth would never be silenced again. Maya stared at the files laid out in front of her, her mind racing. The name they had uncovered was more than just a lead. It was the key to everything. She had been working tirelessly for weeks, connecting the dots, peeling back layers of corruption, and now she knew exactly who was behind it all. But even as she sat there, feeling the weight of the moment, she knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to do. She had exposed Vincent's empire, but the real power lay with the person who had orchestrated it all from the shadows. And that person wasn't going to go down without a fight. Maya had been careful, methodical in her approach, but now, as the pieces of the puzzle finally came together, the stakes were higher than ever. The person behind the scenes had connections that reached into the highest echelons of power, politicians, CEOs, even law enforcement. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal. This was about dismantling a system that had been built on lies and manipulation for years. But Maya was ready. She had faced so much already, and she wasn't about to back down now. The name she had uncovered, the one that linked everything together, was someone who had been untouchable, a shadow figure in the city's elite, pulling strings and making deals behind closed doors. But now, with the evidence she had gathered, Maya knew that nothing could protect them anymore. The journalist she had been working with had already made contact with a trusted source within law enforcement. It was time to take the final step, to bring everything into the light. Maya and the journalist worked through the night, preparing the final report. They knew this had to be done carefully. One wrong move, and everything they had worked for could be destroyed. They had the evidence, the names, the connections, it was all there. But they needed to make sure the story was airtight, that no one could spin it, no one could dismiss it as a lie. As the first light of dawn broke through the window, Maya took a deep breath and hit send. The story was out there. The truth was out there. She could only hope that it would reach the right people. The city had already been shaken by the exposure of Vincent's crimes. But this would change everything. This was the final piece. The story spread quickly, faster than Maya had anticipated. Within hours, authorities had started moving. Investigations were launched, and arrests began. The ripple effect was immediate. The connections Maya had uncovered ran deep, and soon, others in the network began to panic. The system was starting to collapse. Maya watched as the city reacted. The headlines were filled with names she had uncovered, with details she had exposed. The man who had been untouchable was no longer safe. But Maya wasn't done yet. She knew that the Real fight was just beginning. She had given the authorities the tools they needed, but there was still much to be done. The corruption ran too deep, and it wasn't going to disappear overnight. Maya was determined to see it through to the end. As the days passed, Maya stayed in the background, letting the investigation take its course. She knew that she couldn't be the one to make the next move. This was about more than just her. It was about the people who had been affected by the corruption, about the city that had been under the thumb of the powerful for so long. But even as she waited, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were whispers in the air, rumors that Vincent's associates were planning something. They were backing down, but they weren't going quietly. Maya's phone buzzed. It was a message from the journalist. They're moving fast. We need to meet. Maya's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't over. It was far from over. She grabbed her coat and headed out, her mind racing with possibilities. She had uncovered the truth, but now she had to face the consequences of exposing it. Maya knew that the danger wasn't over. But she was no longer the person she had been when this all started. She had faced down the darkness and come out stronger. Now, it was time to finish what she had started. Maya arrived at the meeting spot, a quiet, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. She had received the message just hours earlier, a message that had sent a ripple of unease through her. The journalist had reached out again, this time with a warning. The investigation was moving faster than they had anticipated, and Vincent's associates were making their next move. Maya sat at the table, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface as she glanced around the room. She had grown used to the tension, but tonight felt different. Something in the air was thick with uncertainty. The journalist arrived shortly after, their face grim, their eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. They're making their move, the journalist said without preamble as they took a seat across from Maya. We've got to act now. Maya's heart raced. She had known that Vincent's people wouldn't go down easily, but the urgency in the journalist's voice told her that things were escalating faster than she could have imagined. What's the plan? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The journalist leaned in closer, lowering their voice. We've got the evidence, but we need to get it into the right hands before they silence everyone involved. This isn't just about Vincent anymore. There's a larger network at play, and we need to make sure it all comes out. Maya nodded, her mind already working through the details. The story was far from over. She had exposed Vincent, but she knew that to truly bring justice, she had to take down the entire system that had protected him for so long. The journalist slid a folder across the table to her. This is everything, they said. The final piece. It's time to expose them all. Maya opened the folder carefully, her eyes scanning the pages as she absorbed the weight of the information. There were names, important names, of people who had been involved in the web of corruption. Politicians, business tycoons, law enforcement officers. It was all there, the evidence that tied them together, the proof that could bring them all down. But Maya knew that with this new knowledge came a new set of risks. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. She could already feel the eyes of those in power watching her every move. They wouldn't let this go quietly. We need to make sure the story is airtight, Maya said, her voice steady but determined. Once we release this, there's no going back. The journalist agreed, their eyes hard with resolve. We've already made the connections. We just need the right outlet, the right timing. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that once the story broke, everything would change. She had fought this battle in the shadows, but now she had the power to expose the truth for the world to see. But she also knew that this would make her a target. Vincent and his people would come after her, and anyone who helped her. It was a risk she had to take. As they made their plans for the release of the story, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than ever. But she wasn't afraid. She had already faced down so much, and now, with everything she had uncovered, she knew that she had the power to bring about real change. The next few days were a blur of activity. Maya and the journalist worked late into the night, finalizing the details of the release. Every piece of evidence had to be verified, every name cross-checked. They knew that the people they were up against would do everything in their power to discredit the story, to bury the truth. But Maya was relentless. She had come too far to stop now. The story was ready. The moment had come. Maya stood at the window of her apartment, looking out over the city, the skyline stretching out before her. The city that had been under the grip of corruption for so long was finally on the brink of change. But as she stood there, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to happen. This was the final push. Once the story was out, there would be no turning back. The truth would be exposed, and the world would see what had been hidden for so long. But Maya had never been one to back down from a challenge. She had already stood up to those who thought they could control her, and now she was going to take on the entire system. With a steady hand, she hit send. The story was live. As the minutes ticked by, Maya watched as the world began to react. The headlines spread across the news, the social media posts flooded in, and soon, the entire city was talking about the revelations. Maya knew that this was just the beginning, but she felt a sense of pride. She had done it. She had brought down Vincent's empire. She had exposed the corruption, and now, she was ready to face whatever came next. Maya woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She reached over, groggily rubbing her eyes as she picked it up. The message was from the journalist she had been working with. "We've got movement. They're starting to make arrests. It's time to lay low for a while." Maya sat up, her heart racing as the adrenaline from the previous days surged through her. She had known this moment would come. The truth was finally out there, and now, the consequences were beginning to unfold. The arrest of Vincent and his associates had sent shockwaves through the city, but Maya understood that this was only the beginning. The system they had built was vast and deeply entrenched. Vincent's network was powerful, and though many had been exposed, there were still plenty of people who would stop at nothing to protect their own interests. As Maya looked out of her apartment window at the bustling city, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and apprehension. The world was watching her now, and though the truth was out, she knew she had to remain vigilant. The fight wasn't over. She needed to be careful. Vincent's allies were still out there, and they wouldn't hesitate to target anyone who had contributed to his downfall. For the first time in days, Maya allowed herself to relax a little. She had done what she set out to do. The pieces had fallen into place, and the system of corruption was being dismantled. She knew there would be more work ahead, but for now, she could take a moment to breathe. As the day went on, Maya continued to stay in contact with the journalist. Together, they monitored the unfolding events, watching as arrests were made and more names were exposed. Maya's story had sparked a chain reaction, and the consequences were far-reaching. The entire city was waking up to the reality of what had been happening behind closed doors for years. But even as the truth continued to spread, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she hadn't uncovered. She had exposed the tip of the iceberg, but she had a nagging sense that there were still pieces missing. People still lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings. That night, as she sat in her apartment, Maya found herself replaying everything in her mind. She thought back to her first meeting with the journalist, the moment when she made the decision to stand up and expose Vincent. At the time, it felt like an impossible task, a challenge she wasn't sure she could overcome. But now, looking at the city outside her window, she knew she had made the right choice. She had taken a risk, but it had paid off. But there was still one question lingering in her mind. What next? What would happen now that the truth had come out? Maya knew that the wheels of change were already in motion. The authorities were beginning to act, and the media was picking up the story. But she couldn't ignore the fear that still crept into her thoughts. What would Vincent's allies do next? Would they try to retaliate? As the sun set and the city lights flickered on, Maya received another message from the journalist. "It's getting worse. They're starting to target the whistleblowers, and we've got to be careful. The next move is crucial." Maya's stomach dropped. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. The powerful figures who had been brought to light weren't just going to walk away. They would fight, and they would fight dirty. The story she had uncovered was bigger than just one man. The corruption ran deep, and Maya was now in the center of a battle that would change everything. But she wasn't afraid. She had come too far to back down now. She had started this journey to expose the truth, and she would see it through to the end. The next morning, Maya met with the journalist again, this time in a more secure location. They sat in a quiet room, far from the prying eyes of those who might be watching. The journalist handed her a file, the contents of which would send everything they had worked for into a new direction. "This is bigger than we thought," the journalist said. We've uncovered more links. This goes all the way to the top. Maya flipped through the file, her heart sinking as she saw the names listed. Politicians, business magnates, law enforcement officers, people she never thought would be involved. The corruption was even more widespread than she had imagined. This is it, Maya said, her voice steady but filled with determination. We can't stop now. We have to finish this. Together, Maya and the journalist prepared to release the next wave of information. They knew it would be risky, but they had come too far to turn back. The fight was no longer just about taking down Vincent. It was about exposing the entire system of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for so long. As they finalized their plans, Maya felt a surge of purpose. She had already done what seemed impossible. Now, it was time to take the final step. Maya stood in front of the window, looking out over the city she had come to know so well. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the skyline. The world outside seemed to move at a steady pace, but Maya knew that everything had changed. She had changed. The fight she had started was no longer just a personal mission. It had become a movement, a battle for truth and justice that was spreading far beyond what she had ever anticipated. The story was out, and the ripple effects were beginning to take shape. The city, once blind to the depth of the corruption, was now waking up to the reality of the power players who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Vincent Romano, once untouchable, was now behind bars, but that was just the beginning. The web of corruption was far more intricate than Maya had ever realized. As she sat down at her desk, her phone buzzed with a new message from the journalist. We've got something. It's big. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She had known there was more, had suspected it even, but this was confirmation. She had only scratched the surface. The journalist's words echoed in her mind. We've got something. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat, knowing this was the moment she had been waiting for. She couldn't rest until the whole truth was exposed. As she arrived at the meeting spot, a quiet alleyway tucked between two buildings, she saw the journalist standing there, their face tense with urgency. What do we have? Maya asked, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. The journalist handed her a small folder, the contents of which sent a shockwave through her. Inside were more names, more connections, names that Maya had never expected to see. High-ranking officials, business magnates, even celebrities. The corruption was deeper than she had ever imagined. This was more than just one man's empire. It was a network that stretched across every level of society. How did you find this? Maya asked, her mind racing as she tried to process the new information. It's been in the works for a while, the journalist replied. We've been piecing things together, tracking the flow of money, the deals, the alliances. It's all connected. Maya felt a surge of determination. She had known that Vincent wasn't the only one. She had known that the system was corrupt to its core, but seeing it laid out in front of her, seeing the full extent of the conspiracy, was a different reality altogether. She wasn't just fighting for justice for herself anymore. This was about the entire system, about tearing down the walls that had kept the powerful in control for so long. As the two of them discussed their next steps, Maya knew that time was running out. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that those in power would find a way to cover their tracks, to bury the truth once again. We need to release this, Maya said, her voice firm. Now, we can't wait any longer. The journalist nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll get it to the press, they said. But you need to be prepared. This is going to cause a storm. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. The world was about to change, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The next few days were a whirlwind. Maya and the journalist worked tirelessly, preparing the story for release. Every detail had to be verified, every connection checked and rechecked. It was a race against time, but they knew they couldn't afford to make a mistake. The media had already picked up on the story of Vincent's arrest, but this was the final blow. This would expose the true extent of the corruption and bring down everyone involved. As the story was released, Maya sat back, watching the world react. The headlines were everywhere. The names she had uncovered were on the front pages of every news outlet. The city was in shock. The ripple effects were immediate. Investigations were launched, arrests were made, and the people who had thought they were untouchable were now being dragged into the light. It was everything Maya had hoped for, and more. But even as the city erupted in chaos, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more work to be done. The system was being exposed, but it was not enough to just tear it down. They had to rebuild it, make sure it never happened again. She had been a part of this revolution, but the real fight was just beginning. The next few days brought a new wave of tension. Maya watched as the city grappled with the truth, as people who had once been silent now began to speak out. The corrupt officials were no longer able to hide behind their wealth and influence. It was a victory, but it came with a price. Maya knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The powerful didn't give up without a fight. She had already seen that in the way Vincent's associates had tried to fight back, to discredit the story. But Maya was determined. She had come too far to stop now. The fight for justice, for truth, was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, Maya continued to stay focused, working with the journalist to ensure that the story didn't get buried. She had to stay vigilant, always one step ahead. The truth had won, but the war was still ongoing. The corruption may have been exposed, but it would take time to rebuild. Maya knew she had to be patient, but she was ready. She had already faced so much and come out stronger. The journey had changed her, but it had also shown her the power of standing up for what was right. And with that power, Maya knew she could help shape a new future for the city, one where justice and truth were no longer silenced. Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment, the world outside buzzing with the aftermath of everything that had happened. The story had exploded in ways she couldn't have imagined. What started as an investigation into one man's criminal empire had become a movement, a wave of change that was sweeping through the city. But despite all the victories, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. The powerful forces she had exposed were still out there, and she knew they wouldn't stop. They would regroup, find new ways to protect themselves, and continue to fight back. It was only a matter of time before they made their move. As the days passed, Maya's life became a blur of phone calls, meetings, and constant vigilance. She had given the world the truth, but now she had to stay ahead of the game. The journalist she had been working with kept her updated on the latest developments. Every day, more arrests were made, more names were exposed, and the city seemed to move closer to a reckoning. But even as the system began to crack, there were whispers in the air, rumors of a counterattack. Powerful figures, those who had once been untouchable, were making plans to protect themselves. Maya couldn't afford to let her guard down. She had spent weeks exposing the truth, but now she had to make sure it stuck. She had to ensure that the changes didn't get buried, that the people who had been complicit in the corruption were held accountable. She couldn't let the story fade away. One evening, as Maya sat with the journalist, the tension in the air was palpable. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the hum of the city outside. They were discussing their next steps, what had worked, what hadn't, and how to keep the momentum going. Maya had always known that this was going to be a long fight, but now it felt even more real. She had exposed so much, but there was still more to uncover. She had to dig deeper. "We've got to keep pushing," Maya said, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "The people who are behind all this, they won't give up easily. They'll try to bury the truth. We can't let them." The journalist nodded in agreement. "We've already seen how powerful they are, but we've also seen how strong the people are now. They're ready for change. They won't let it slip away." Maya felt a sense of pride in those words. She had always believed that the truth had the power to bring about change, but now she saw it unfolding before her. The people were ready to stand up, to take action. They were no longer afraid. The journalist handed her another file, this one thicker than the last. Maya opened it slowly, her heart beating faster as she scanned the pages. This was the next step, the final piece. The information inside this file would expose even more, connect the dots between the remaining players in the network, and bring the entire system to its knees. Maya knew that this was it. She had been working for this moment, and now it was time to release it to the world. The story would no longer be about one man or one network. It would be about a city that was taking back its power. The next morning, Maya and the journalist finalized the story. They worked quickly but carefully, making sure every detail was airtight. Maya couldn't afford any mistakes. She had come this far, and she couldn't let the system bury everything she had worked for. As they prepared to release the information, Maya's phone rang. It was a call from someone inside the police department. "Maya," the voice said, Things are moving faster than we thought. We need to act now. Maya's stomach tightened. She knew this was the moment. The final push. I'm ready, she said, her voice resolute. Let's make sure this goes all the way. Within hours, the story was live. The city was in shock as the names of the remaining criminals were revealed, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The corruption that had plagued the city for so long was now out in the open, and nothing could stop it. But even as the story spread, Maya knew the work wasn't done. There were still people who would try to resist, still people who would fight to protect the status quo. She couldn't let her guard down now. As she watched the story unfold on the news, Maya felt a sense of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the real work was just beginning. The system had been exposed, but now it needed to be rebuilt. Maya's fight for justice was far from over, but she had taken the first step, and she knew that, no matter what came next, she would be ready. Maya sat quietly at her desk, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. The city outside was buzzing with the aftermath of everything that had happened. The arrests, the investigations, the massive media coverage. The world had changed, and she had helped make that change happen. Yet, despite the victory, something in her couldn't fully relax. The powerful people she had exposed were still out there, licking their wounds, strategizing. Maya knew they wouldn't let it end this easily. They would fight back. She had seen the first signs of resistance when certain names began to disappear from the headlines. Some were trying to bury the story, some were attempting to silence key witnesses, and others were spreading misinformation. Maya had expected it, but now she felt the pressure mounting. The fight for justice wasn't over. It had only just begun. A few days had passed since the last big release of information. The criminal network she had uncovered was still being dismantled, piece by piece, but Maya knew the work had to continue. She couldn't afford to be complacent. The more she looked at the evidence she had gathered, the more she realized just how much was still hidden. How many more people were involved? Who were the hidden hands still pulling the strings behind the scenes? With that thought in mind, Maya reached out to the journalist again. It was time to dig deeper, to uncover the last pieces of the puzzle. They met in a quiet cafe, far from prying eyes, to discuss the next steps. We can't stop now, Maya said, her voice firm. I know there's more. We need to keep pushing. The journalist nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I've been tracking the movements of the remaining players. They're not going down without a fight. We have to be ready for whatever they throw at us next. Maya's thoughts raced as she absorbed the new information. She had been working with the journalist for so long now, piecing together the story that no one wanted to acknowledge, but the closer they got to the truth, the more complicated the situation became. This wasn't just about one man or one criminal network anymore. It was about a system that had infiltrated every level of power in the city. She couldn't afford to back down now. What do we have so far? Maya asked. The journalist slid a new folder across the table. Maya opened it carefully, scanning the documents inside. The more she read, the more she realized just how deep the corruption ran. The network she had uncovered was even bigger than she had imagined. This wasn't just about politics or business anymore. The reach of the people involved stretched into every corner of the city, law enforcement, media, even the judicial system. We need to expose them all, Maya said, her voice steady. Every last one of them. We will, the journalist replied. But we have to be careful. They're watching us now, and they won't hesitate to make us disappear if they can. We need a plan. Maya knew the risks. She had already seen firsthand how dangerous the people in power could be. But she had come too far to back down now. The truth had to come out. And if she was the one to make that happen, then so be it. After all, she had already faced the worst of it. She wasn't going to let fear stop her now. The two of them spent the next few days digging through the evidence, looking for any additional clues, any names they could tie to the network. They worked late into the night, going over every detail, connecting dots that seemed unrelated at first. With each new revelation, Maya felt a sense of urgency. The truth was closer than ever, and she couldn't afford to let it slip away. The journalist was right. They had to be careful. They needed to be smart, strategic. It wasn't just about exposing the criminals anymore. It was about taking them down, piece by piece, making sure they didn't slip away into the shadows again. As the investigation moved forward, Maya found herself at a crossroads. She could feel the pressure mounting, and every step forward seemed to carry new risks. But she couldn't turn back now. She had started this fight for justice, and she wasn't going to stop until every last person involved was held accountable. "We're almost there," the journalist said one evening, as they pored over the final pieces of the puzzle. "Just one more push, and we'll have everything we need to take them down." Maya nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew that this next step would be the hardest. They had already made enemies of some of the most powerful people in the city, but with each new revelation, the walls of their empire were beginning to crumble, and soon, the truth would be impossible to ignore. As they prepared to release the final wave of information, Maya felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This was it, the moment they had been working toward for so long. But she knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The people they were about to expose wouldn't go down without a fight. They would try to cover their tracks, to manipulate the truth, to silence anyone who stood in their way. But Maya wasn't afraid. She had already exposed more than she ever thought possible, and now it was time to finish what she had started. The city was waiting for the truth, and she was ready to give it to them. Maya sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the screen of her phone. Her mind was racing with everything that had unfolded over the past few weeks. The release of the final piece of the investigation had ignited a storm. Arrests were being made, and the public was reacting with shock and anger. But amidst all the chaos, Maya knew this was only the beginning. The powerful people she had exposed weren't just going to accept defeat. They would regroup, plot, and try to salvage whatever they could. Maya couldn't afford to relax, not now. The battle for justice wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase. The journalist she had been working with had been providing her with updates, but the messages had started to slow down. The longer the story stayed in the public eye, the more dangerous it became. People were starting to get nervous, those who were still in the shadows, pulling the strings. But Maya wasn't about to let fear dictate her next move. She had already risked everything to expose the corruption, and she wasn't going to stop now. She couldn't. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and strategy sessions. Maya met with the journalist and a few trusted allies to discuss their next steps. They couldn't afford to let the story fade into the background. The investigation had already shaken the city, but it needed to be pushed even further. They had to make sure the truth wasn't buried. "We've exposed the surface, but now we need to dig deeper," Maya said, her voice steady. "There are still people out there who need to be held accountable. We need to find out who's still pulling the strings and make sure they don't get away with this." The journalist nodded. "We've got the names, but we need more. We need irrefutable evidence, something they can't deny. And we need it fast." Maya knew what was at stake. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. There were still players in the game. Powerful, untouchable figures who would stop at nothing to protect themselves. But Maya had already been through the worst of it. She had faced down Vincent Romano and his empire, and she had come out stronger. She wasn't about to back down now. "I'll start digging through the files again," Maya said, determination in her eyes. "We need to tie this all together. One last push, and we'll have everything we need to bring down the entire network." The journalist handed her a new set of files, documents that had been recovered from one of the key players in the network. "These are the ones we need to focus on," they said. "They're more important than anything we've seen before." Maya scanned the papers, her eyes flicking over the names and the numbers. It was clear that this was the final piece of the puzzle. If they could get this information into the right hands, the entire operation would collapse. But there was one problem. Those in power wouldn't give up so easily. They had already shown how far they were willing to go to protect their secrets. Maya had to move carefully. "We can't release this just yet," Maya said. "We need to make sure everything is airtight. One slip up, and they'll use it against us." "Agreed," the journalist replied. "We've got to be smart. But once this is out there, there's no turning back." Maya spent the next few days working tirelessly, going through the files with a fine-tooth comb. She had to make sure that every piece of evidence was solid, that every name was connected, and that the network would be exposed in full. She couldn't afford any mistakes. As the days went on, the pressure started to mount. The authorities had already started moving on the information they had, but Maya knew that the real work was just beginning. She had already exposed the tip of the iceberg, but there was so much more beneath the surface. The network was vast, and the people involved were powerful. It was going to take everything she had to make sure the truth came out. The more Maya worked, the more she realized just how deep the corruption went. This wasn't just about Vincent Romano or even his associates. It was about an entire system that had been built on lies, manipulation, and greed. Maya had to be careful. She couldn't let anyone intimidate her or silence her now. As the final pieces of the investigation came together, Maya knew that the moment of truth was close. She had everything she needed to finish what she had started. She had exposed the criminals, but now she had to ensure that the system they had built was brought down for good. "This is it," Maya said to the journalist, her voice steady. "Once we release this, it's over for them. The city will know the truth, and nothing will stop it." Together, they prepared to release the final piece of the investigation. The evidence was solid, the story was clear, and Maya knew that once the truth came out, there would be no going back. The city was on the edge of change, and Maya was ready to be the one to push it forward. As she sat back, staring at the screen in front of her, Maya felt a sense of resolve. She had done what she set out to do. She had fought for justice, and now she was about to take the final step. The world would see the truth. Maya stood at the window of her apartment, looking out over the city that had been her battleground for so long. The skyline shimmered in the early morning light, but the tranquility outside felt distant, almost surreal. The storm of her fight was far from over, and the weight of the truth she had exposed was still heavy on her shoulders. The final release had sent shockwaves throughout the city, but Maya knew that even with all the progress, the battle wasn't over. She had torn down Vincent's empire, yes, but the network of corruption was vast, and it extended far beyond him. The authorities had started moving swiftly, making arrests and investigating those linked to the network, but Maya understood the complexity of the situation. The people at the top would fight back. They would try to bury the truth, to rewrite the narrative. She could already feel the tension building, like the calm before the storm. The files she had unearthed were enough to bring down some of the city's most powerful figures, but she knew they would not go down without a fight. As she sat back down at her desk, Maya looked at the documents in front of her. Every name, every connection, every scandal, it was all there. And yet, despite the relief that the truth was finally out, there was a part of her that felt uneasy. The work she had done had been enormous, but the consequences of exposing such a deeply ingrained system of corruption were not yet fully realized. Maya had uncovered so much, but she also knew that she had stirred up a hornet's nest. People who had once held unimaginable power were now being exposed, and they were not going to let it go quietly. "We need to stay ahead of this," Maya thought aloud, turning to the journalist. "The world is watching, and we can't afford to falter now. They will retaliate. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next." The journalist nodded. "I've been keeping an eye on the developments. The arrests are just the beginning. There are still pieces missing, and the people who are involved won't stop fighting to protect themselves. We need to be vigilant." Maya had known the risks all along, but hearing it out loud made everything feel so much more real. She had exposed the truth, but now she had to make sure it was protected, that it didn't get buried or twisted by those who would rather see it disappear. As the days went by, Maya felt the pressure mounting. The media continued to buzz with the aftermath of the release, but there was a quiet unease beneath it all. She knew the powerful figures who had been exposed wouldn't take kindly to their empire crumbling. Some were already trying to distance themselves, issuing statements and downplaying their involvement, while others were scrambling to find ways to silence the story before it could spread even further. Maya couldn't let them succeed. She had come too far, and now the truth was her greatest weapon. But she also understood that weapons could be used against her. With each new development, each new arrest, the stakes grew higher. She couldn't afford to get complacent. Every step forward was met with new opposition, new efforts to bury the story. Maya had to stay one step ahead, always thinking, always anticipating what the powerful figures would do next. One evening, Maya received a message from a source within the police department. It was cryptic, but it was enough to make her sit up straight. "They're preparing a counterattack," the message read. "We need to act quickly before they silence everyone involved. They're making their move." Maya's heart raced. She had known that the fight wasn't over, but hearing it confirmed made her feel the weight of it all. This wasn't just about exposing the corrupt system anymore. It was about protecting those who had helped expose it. "We can't let them win," Maya muttered under her breath. She had started this fight for justice, and now she had to finish it. The next few days were spent in a haze of urgency. Maya worked alongside the journalist, making sure every piece of evidence was preserved and safeguarded. They had to prepare for the worst, for the retaliation that was already in motion. Maya knew that as soon as the truth reached the wrong hands, there would be an attempt to destroy it. The information they had uncovered was too powerful to be left unchecked. They could not afford to let anyone discredit it, erase it, or manipulate it. Maya felt the weight of it all, but she also felt the fire inside her grow stronger. She had already faced the darkest parts of the city, had already taken on its most powerful figures, and she had emerged victorious. But now, the real battle began. She had to make sure that the fight for truth, for justice, didn't die out in the chaos. The city had to know. The world had to know what had really been happening. As the day of the final push approached, Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. This was her moment. She had done what no one thought was possible. Now it was time to make sure the truth stayed in the light, no matter what. The battle for justice was far from over, but Maya was ready to face whatever came next.